Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we will learn how do you write the unit test cases for the entity framework repository. So I have a sample repository created on employee DB context. So I have an employee database in which I have multiple tables which has been described here in the DB model. So if I open my DB context, this is the employee DB context which has these two tables, and one of them is employee, one of them is department. If you look at the structure of employee table, it contains several number of fields. Now on top of this DB context we have the employee repository, and the structure of the repository looks like this. It has several methods: add employee, add or update employee, get employee, and remove employee. And this is the implementation. Now the question is, how do you write the mock unit test cases on these repositories? This is what I'm going to show you in this demonstration. For this, I'm going to create a Microsoft unit test case project. You can write NUnit, MS unit test cases, or XUnit, whichever you want to create. So I'll go ahead and create new project. I'll use the unit test, which is of Microsoft unit test case project. I'll select yes, next. I'll give it a name as in employee repository test. I'll provide the location of the of my folder where I want to store the unit test cases. Click next, and I'm using a .NET Framework 6. I'll click next, create. So this is my Microsoft unit test case project which has been ready. Before that, let me just make sure that I'm able to compile the project including my repository. As you can see that both the projects are working fine and it's up to date. Next, I'm going to add a reference of this service repository project, which is employee repository project. I click OK so that I can have all my methods which I want to unit test. I'll rename this default class. I'll call it as an employee test. Here I'm going to add a couple of NuGet packages. The very first one I'd like to use is the fluent assertion. So this is the one I'm going to use. Next one I'll be using is the bogus to create some stub data. That's it for now. Now let's rename this test method for now. Let's call it as in add new employee, because that's the method we want to test. So if you look at, these are all methods and we want to test all of these. So I'll just capture it here so that we know which method we are going to run the unit test cases on. Now this needs employee data to add in the DB context or into our database. For this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a code to create a stub employee data. So based on the structure of my employee class, I have created a sample method which using the faker, which with the help of bogus library, and this faker I'm going to use to generate my employee data. Here you can see that in this method I can pass the count, and based on the number of count which I will provide, it will create those number of records. So this one I can use to generate my record or to create an employee. For example, to generate one single employee record, I can use the method like this that will generate one employee record as an stub data. Now I need to create a mock of my DB context, which is going to be DB context, and for this I'll use the DB context mock employee DB context equals to new. I'll use mock class, and this means that I need to have the using with the mock, and it says that I need to install this NuGet package. So I'll say yes, install the NuGet package with the latest version. So that will install the latest NuGet package for me. So this is the mock of the DB context object is been added. If you look at the DB context here, currently you have two constructor. One is the overloaded constructor, in case if you would like to provide an option to your DB context, and you need to have a default constructor as well. If you do not create a default constructor, then you will get an error. I'll show you later when we run the program. Now with this, I'm going to set up my record. So you can use the setup method with the to set up your DB context method. So here we will have x dot number of methods. Let's say we have update method, we have a save changes method, or you would find the DB context with the name of your class, which is employee class. So I would like to set my employee records, and for this reason I'm going to use the data which we have here. Let's save this, and here it's not going to, here we cannot use this data as is, which says that you cannot convert the DB model employee to entity framework DB set, because this requires a kind of a DB set object. So for this we need to declare a DB set of employee type, because if you look at the DB context, we have the employee which is of type DB set, similarly in department which is of DB set. So we need to mock these DB sets as well. So I'm going to mock these DB sets next. Here we need to set up these employee DB set with these line of code, which means that any query which you are running on these employee DB set, if you are running a lambda expression queries, then it should have a set as an queryable of this should return a queryable of the employee type, and then the data, which is this one, needs to be a queryable type as well. For that reason I'm going to use the data as an queryable type. So let's say I'll call it as a stub, and stub dot as queryable. That's what we are going to do, so that we can use it. As you can see that now all the errors are gone. Now let me just rename this. So my setup is ready. So if I run query on any of these data, I should have a result back. Now if we try and run our methods, which is our service method, which is our repository method, so for that reason I'll go to the repository and create an instance of this repository. So I'll copy this, create an instance of the repository. I'll call it as an equals to new. This repository requires an object of DB context, which is this DB context, which I'll be providing. Just rename this DB context dot object. As you can see that the DB context is a dependency injection on the object type. Now we have a repository available, which you can use any method with this repository. So I can say add employee and then employee record. So I have the new record created, which is this one. So I'll be adding this particular record as an employee record, which is, let's say, first record, first or default. Okay. Now if we run these test cases, let's see what happens. It has passed successfully, because if you look at the definition of add employee, we are just adding a resource to this particular DB context. So whatever DB context we are providing it, we are returning it back. But wait a moment, I haven't checked the response back, so I do not have anything back here. So what I'll be doing here is I'll use await, async await, and for this reason I need to change this method to async to the task type, otherwise it will not work. Now if I check the response with using my fluent assertion, which is, let's say, response should be true, let's say, let's see what happens, whether it will return the same result, which is success or not. We'll rerun again. This time it has failed. It says the expected response was true, but it is found false. Why? The reason for that is because when we go to, if you go to the add method, you are adding successfully, but when you return using the save changes, as we have not mocked this particular save changes method, it is returning, by default it is returning 0, and according to this condition this becomes false, and that's why our test cases is failing. So what does it mean? That you need to set up the method which is a save method as well. So here in the DB context we have a save changes method which requires a return type of integer. So I'm going to provide any method which is of type integer in this case. Let's see the test case result now. This is working fine now because we have the save changes method which is marked here. Now what I'll do is I would like to utilize this mocking framework as is. So instead of recreating again and again, what I'll do is I'll keep this into the separate repository, into a separate method, and I'll call create a new initialize method like this. The stub data, which is data which is a list of employee, so this method I'm going to use as a test initialization because this is the one which I want to use as a constructor. And similarly this repository I'll make it as a generic, as a public variable or a global variable. And now as we have all these methods, I'll call it as init. Let's rerun the test again. That's fine. So test is working fine here. So we have added a new employee, or I can say that to add a new employee I can use a new stub data, and I can use this data like this. Okay, now let's test another method which is of type get all employee. I'm going to call this as a test as well. Now here we are going to use get all employees, and that doesn't require any parameter, as you can see here. So that should return all the employee data. So here we are going to check the count of employee should be, because we have the 10 number of record which we have inserted or created in our DB set, which means in total we should have 10 records. So let's say if we match with these 10 count, what happens? So we have got the result and it succeeded because we have got the 10 record from the result. Now if I prioritize these, let's say if I would like to execute these test cases in a particular order, what I can do here is I can specify this as in priority. So I can set as priority as 1, next priority as 2. So what will happen now, these test cases will execute in, instead of in parallel, it will execute in a particular sequence. Yeah. Next, we are going to create another method which is of type add or update employee. The difference on this particular method is, if you look at the implementation of this method, here we are running a variable or link query. So based on the given employee, if it employee is present, then it will update that employee. If the employee is not present, then it will create new employee data, right? So here add update, add new scenario where an employee is not present, then we will basically create a new employee. So I'll just use this. I will not specify any priority here, and another scenario I'll add. So what is the error here? First or default. Okay, update an employee. So this is in a case of the update scenario. So if you go back to the method, the add scenario is going to be this one, which is not matching the condition. Update scenario is where we'll match one record. So to match one record, what I'll do is I'll use this stub, and instead of generating a new record, I'll say give me a first record from this stub only. So I'll say first or default from here, so that we have the employee updated. Updated employee details are available. Okay, once you, let's run these test cases now. Alright, all the test cases are passing successfully so far. Let's create a new method which is going to be a remove employee. So here in this case, from the DB context, we are going to remove an employee. Let's see if this works fine or not. All of them are working fine. Now let's do one thing. Let's use one of the scenario and try to basically debug the test case. So for this reason, I'm going to put a breakpoint here and we are going to debug this. So I'll click here on the debug test. This is a employee update scenario. So I'll press F11. This should find a record, and in this case we are successfully updating the record, and that is what we need. And this is successfully working as we have covered all the scenarios, right? Similarly, if you would update or debug this, you will find that it will go into a else condition, which is this one, because the record in that case will not found, so it will add a new record in the repository. So that's it about the unit test case scenario. So a couple of things you need to remember here is, first is I'm using a stub, I'm using a bogus NuGet package to create or generate the records which I want to use in my DB context. You need to set up the DB context properly with the queryable scenarios, or with all these 3-4 lines of code which will give you ability to run any of the link queries in your data. Next, if you are using any other methods like these save changes, you need to set up these methods as well. Finally, once you have the data generated, you need to set up that data like this on individual entity. Like in this example, we were using the employees entity, so we have set up the context on the employee entity, whereas we have the department entity as well, but we are not using for this demonstration the department one, so I have not set up anything for the department. Next, on the repository or on the DB context, if I go to the DB context, you need to remember that the DB context should have the default constructors. So for example, if I remove the default constructor and rerun my test cases, then all my test cases will fail because it will not be able to initialize my code or all my DB context scenarios. As you can see that as and when I've removed the default constructor from the DB context, I'm getting this particular error, and that's what that is what is all about, that we need a default constructor to run your test case scenario. That's it. I hope you have found this useful. If it is, please give it a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. See you in the next video.